Hello and welcome to the inaugural Colonel Frank Seeley Academy Baccalaureate Lecture. During the lecture I'm going to hopefully give you a little bit of food for thought, so at times I might ask you to pause the video whilst you think about a question, or possibly if you're watching this with somebody at home, a parent, a carer, a sibling, have a little discussion with them about the content. Afterwards you'll find on Show My Homework a follow-up activity to submit as part of your baccalaureate programme. For the first lecture in the series, as it falls to me to kick it off, I thought I would tackle a question that I'm often asked in the first half term by Year 7 and occasionally by Year 8 pupils, which is, why do we have to learn languages, or better, why don't we all speak English? So in the lecture we are going to look at what we mean by English. What is this English which we would like everybody to speak? Is it the same language for all of us? Is it really English that we are speaking? And do we understand English? And then if we decide that actually perhaps all of us speaking English is not particularly practical, we will look at why we might want to learn another language, which language we might want to learn, why sometimes only another language is going to suit, and the benefits of learning languages. So to kick us off, I thought I'd keep it nice and simple and give you a piece of English to read. So if you would like to pause the video to be able to read this bit of poetry, please do. And whilst you're reading it, there are some questions for you to think about. So the first question is, who is the poem about? The next question, how is he described? And the final question, what do they call him? So if you'd like to pause the video now whilst you think about and discuss the answers to these questions, please do. Okay, so that was pretty easy, right? Bit of English, some questions to answer. Well, of course it is, because we all speak English, don't we? Oh, hang on, it was a little bit difficult. Why might that be? Well, actually, let's make it slightly easier for you then. And here is the same poem in rather a more recognisable form of English. So now we can probably answer those questions a little bit more easily. The poem is about an apprentice. He's described as being gaily dressed as a goldfinch in the woods, brown as a berry, good looking, short, with black hair, and he was called Perkin Reveller. So why was that task so difficult at the beginning on the previous slide? Because this is English, but it's not the English that you know at the moment. It is a form of English known as Middle English, and the poem itself comes from Geoffrey Chaucer, who was a famous poet who wrote the Canterbury Tales in the 1300s, and this is the English that people would have spoken during the 1300s. So when we talk about why don't we all speak English, actually, if we did all speak English, we would probably be speaking a version of English which was much more similar to this poem, the original that I showed you, than this poem in the English that you might know at the moment. And if you spoke to somebody on the opposite side of the world who spoke English, it may well be that the English they spoke was as indecipherable to you, or as difficult for you to understand, as this poem might have been at the start of this lecture. It's just something to think about. But actually, English has moved on, and here are some words that you will recognise from English and that you will be able to define and you will understand. They're all English words, except they're not. Anonymous, it's not English, I'm afraid. It's taken from Greek. So its original version was a Greek word. Lute, not English, it's Hindi. Guru, not really English either, that's Sanskrit. Cigar, wasn't an originally English word either, it's Spanish. Cookie is an English pronounced version of an original word in Dutch. Karaoke, famously Japanese, meaning silent orchestra, I believe. Justice, that's not English either, unfortunately. The concept of justice is very much a French one. Delicatessen, well, that's got to be English. There's one in the supermarket, must be English. It's not though, because it comes from the German delikat essen, so fine food. Glitch, that's got to be English, right? Fortunately not. Glitch comes from Yiddish. Chocolate, not English either. So chocolate comes from the Nahuatl language, which is a native language from Mexico, via Spanish. It came to English through the means of Spanish. And paparazzi, well, that's definitely English. There's nothing more English than the concept of paparazzi, taking pictures for the tabloid newspapers. But actually, that's not English either. That's an Italian word. So not only do we have to consider that if we did all speak English, would we all be speaking the English that we know now? Or would we be speaking a variant of a much older form of English? But also, a lot of the words that we use in English, they weren't originally English words. In fact, of the English language as we currently know it, about 29% of words originate in French or in Latin. And from the 1,000 most commonly used words in the English language, almost a half of them have French origin. So not only do we have justice, we also have common French expressions that we use. So things like RSVP, that stands for Répondez s'il vous plaît, which is French. We also talk about making a faux pas. We talk about having déjà vu, all of which are from French. But things like parachute and detour are also French words. Lots of the food words that we currently use to talk about the meats that we eat if we're not vegetarian or vegan, if we are meat eaters, they come from French too. So things like veal comes from the French veau, beef comes from the French bœuf, and mutton comes from the French mouton for sheep. So lots and lots of words that we think of as being English, they're actually originally from French. So I just want you again, if you need to pause the video, have a little think, why might that be? Why do so many words in English come from French originally? So the answer is down to something that happened in 1066. So in 1066, we had the Battle of Hastings and the Norman conquest. So William of Normandy, which is now part of France, became the King of England. We know him as William the Conqueror, and he, because he came from what we now know as France, he spoke French, and all of his courtiers, the people that he sort of lived with, all spoke French too. So for quite a lot of years, the royal family and the people who were the aristocracy and the sort of high tier people in society, they all spoke French too, which meant that a lot of the words that they use filtered down into the Old English that the native people in England were speaking. So lots and lots of words come into languages for historical reasons. So we talked about how this is English, Middle English, and this is modern day English. But how did it go from the English of Chaucer to the English that we would recognise and be able to answer questions about? And why did I say that actually if we did all speak English, some of it might not sound very English. It's because languages evolve. So in different places in the world, if a language has started out in that place, people have used the language differently, and the language itself has changed meaning, which is why if you go to Canada and you speak French in Canada, a lot of the words used in the French that they speak in Quebec in Canada are very old-fashioned words that they would not use in France. They would consider them to be similar sorts of words to the words that are in this poem to us. Likewise, in South America, the Spanish that they speak is a different version of Spanish to the Spanish that you are learning at school and the Spanish that is spoken in Europe, because those languages moved across the Atlantic during the time that post America being discovered, so several hundred years ago, and then those languages have developed in their own way. We know that languages evolve because they are constantly evolving even in this country. So just this year, quite recently, some new words have been added to the Oxford English Dictionary. Here you can see some words that were added as recently as June. So a freegan, a plastic footprint, a stan, and nomophobia. These are all words that we've had to invent, or phrases we've had to invent, because they discuss concepts that never existed before. So we didn't used to worry about how much plastic we used, so we didn't need to talk about our plastic footprint. We didn't have a mobile phone, so we didn't have the phobia of it not being with us. So these new concepts mean that new words are being invented to help us to talk about and communicate with each other about things that we would like to talk about. So a little quiz for you. Here there are some words which were invented relatively recently in the last 100 years or so. So again, if you'd like to pause the video now, you will be able to have a little think about what year these words were invented and see how close you can get. Okay, I'm going to reveal all. So Wi-Fi was invented, first use of Wi-Fi was used in 1999, because obviously it didn't exist before then. Interestingly, email, the word for email, the concept of email, it existed or was first noticed in 1979. It's actually quite a long time before I remember email being used widely. Zip, as in to zip up your jumper or zip up your coat, that only was started to be used in 1932, and science fiction started to be used in 1929. So as well as adding words in to talk about things that are new concepts, sometimes words fall out of use. So we stop using words because they become out of fashion and other words come in. So one of the reasons why sometimes we find studying older plays and poetry difficult is sometimes the language isn't familiar to us. So things like thou, thee, thyself, thine and thy might appear, and they're not words that we would use anymore. A little quiz, and if you can rope in your older siblings, if you've got some relatively older siblings, or your parents or carers or grandparents, they might be able to help you with this next little quiz. So how many of these words do you use, and how many of these words are common parlance in your family, and what do they mean? I'll give you a little bit of time to pause the video if you'd like, and then I'll tell you what they mean. Are we back? Okay, so we've got the word groovy, which is an old-fashioned way of saying something's really cool, or perhaps some music is quite good. We might call it groovy. A cad or a bounder might be a man usually who's not very pleasant and perhaps doesn't treat ladies very nicely. If something's ace, that's a really good word that I like. It's really good. It's ace. It's fantastic. Now, a cassette, you'll hear me say this all the time because I haven't quite got with the programme about the fact that we don't have cassettes anymore, but cassette is a little rectangular device which we put in a machine to listen to music. Funky. Now, funky to me could mean two things. It's either the same as groovy, so it's quite cool, or it's something that smells a bit funny. So I think that's where a meaning has changed a little bit. Hornswoggle is a fantastic word, and I think we should all try and bring hornswoggle back. But if someone has been hornswoggled, they've been deceived or conned or swindled. And none of these words have been used really in yonks. So yonks means for ages. They've not been used for a long time in yonks. How many of these words could you sneak into a conversation next week, I wonder? That's a little bit of a challenge for you. Okay, but it's not just time that affects language and means that the English that we all want to speak might not be the same English as somebody else. It also depends on where we live. So another little challenge to see how many of these you can get. So you might want to pause the video, chat with your siblings or your parents or carers and see if you can figure out who or what is our kid if you're in Manchester. Who or what is drive when you're in Bristol? What is a ginnel if you're up in Yorkshire and I believe Lancashire as well? Who or what is corporation pop if you're in Liverpool? What's the netty in Newcastle? Who are yous in Northern Ireland? And my Spanish group from year 7 should know this because we've talked about this week or recently. And who or what is a Bobo or a Bobo in Nottingham? I'll give you time to think about it and then I'll let you know your answers. So the answers to the who or what quiz are: our kid in Manchester is our brother or sister, usually I think younger sibling. Drive in Bristol is the bus driver. So when you get off the bus in Bristol, you have to say thanks, drive. A ginnel in Yorkshire and Lancashire is an alleyway or a little passageway. Corporation pop in Liverpool, if somebody offers you this to drink, it might not be as exciting as it sounds because it is tap water. And when you've had a lot of corporation pop, you will probably need the netty because in Newcastle, that is another word for the toilet. Use is a really good way of talking to more than one person at once. So use means you all in Northern Ireland. And a Bobo or Bobo in Nottingham, I believe, is a horse. So that might be one that you use. So languages change a lot because they change through time. They also change depending whereabouts in the country you live. And the words that you choose to use or the words that your parents use sometimes tell people a lot about you. So they can tell us where you're from. They can tell us what your social background is sometimes as well. So just another really interesting little test is for you to decide or you to say what you would call each of these pictures. So this one here, what would you call it? Some people call it a couch. Some people call it a sofa. And some people would argue it's a settee. And this one here, well, I would call that a jitty, but I think in Nottingham people would look at me a bit strangely. You might call it an alleyway. It's also, if you're in Yorkshire, as we've already established, a ginnel. Now, this is a good one. This causes a lot of arguments. So, this is the meal that you have at school around about 12:25, between 12:25 and 1:15. Is it your lunch or is it your dinner? And if it's your dinner, what do you call the meal that you have in the evening when you go home? Another one that's going to cause some fights, I think. What do we call this? Is it a cob? Do you call it a batch, which is what we call it where I'm from? Is it a balm or is it a roll? what do we call these? Don't know if anyone wears these anymore. Are they pumps? Are they plimsolls? Or are they, as my dad would have called them, daps? And finally, what do we call this device for looking at our reflection and checking we look nice? Do you, like me, call it a mirror? Or do you call it a looking glass? So if we're arguing that everybody in the world should speak English, it's a little bit more complicated than just saying everybody should speak English, because I bet we don't even agree on what certain things are called in English. I'll be very surprised if anybody agrees with me that this is a batch. I imagine quite a lot of you would call this dinner and I would call it lunch. So we've got to think about how, if we wanted everyone to speak the same version of English, is that even possible? Because there's so much variation just between us. And we haven't even started talking about what Americans and Australians call things. So maybe we can agree that actually it's much more fun and much more exciting if we call things different names, we use different versions of language, and actually we talk about the origins of language and what they can tell us. And if that's the case, perhaps we can open up our minds to not just thinking about English and how interesting and exciting it is to see the evolutions in English language, but also maybe what some other languages are like. And perhaps we could think about which other language we might like to learn. So some suggestions for you. Mandarin is the language that is spoken most widely in the whole world. So you might think, well, actually, Mandarin could be useful because the most people speak it. Spanish is apparently, according to research, the easiest language for any foreigner to learn. Well, you're lucky that a lot of you are already learning Spanish. Italian is good for people who are musical, because a lot of our musical terms come from Italian. Likewise, if you're into food, lots and lots of words to do with food, particularly pastas and pizzas, they come from Italian. Afrikaans and Dutch can be really good languages to learn for English speakers. They are the most similar languages to English and the easiest to pick up if you're an English speaker, if you're a native English speaker. You might think, well, actually, I want to learn to protect a language that's not quite so widespread, and perhaps you could learn some Welsh. Welsh is a language that comes from the British Isles, not hugely spoken anywhere else, but would be a really nice one to keep going. And if none of those arguments persuade you, then some research has shown that French is considered the sexiest or most attractive language in the world. So perhaps you might want to learn that to boost your romantic score, let's say. But if I can't persuade you to learn a language for the fun of it, there are some other benefits to language learning. So have a little think what they might be. You can pause the video and have a little discussion about it. And then we'll talk through some of these. So these are all proven by different pieces of research. So it's proven that learning a foreign language helps to boost your brain power, improve your memory, make you better at multitasking, sharpen your mind, and help your brain stay sharper for longer. So it's been proven by science that people who speak more than one language are less susceptible to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Helps your decision-making skills. Something that I always think is true is that it improves your English or your other, if you speak another language, learning a foreign language can really help you understand your native language, because you start to think about aspects of the grammar that perhaps you've not thought about before. It has been proven to help you get better grades in all your exams, even things that you might think aren't connected, like maths, for example. You might think, well, that's not got anything to do with languages, but because it boosts your brain power and helps your memory and makes you better at decision making, learning languages has been proven to help people get better grades in exams, including things like maths and science. Definitely makes you a better communicator, makes you more open-minded, and will improve your job opportunities. But it's not just about those benefits. Sometimes the word that you need just doesn't exist in your language. And some words only exist in a foreign language. So sometimes only that language will do. And here are some examples. So the favourite part of a meal for me is la sobremesa. So it's when you've sat around in a restaurant with your friends, or you can imagine that you've sat around in a restaurant with all your friends at the moment. And it's that time where everybody's had something to eat and everyone's feeling quite relaxed and you're just enjoying the conversation and enjoying the company. And in English, we don't have a word for that. But in Spanish, we call it la sobremesa. Another thing that we don't have a word for in English, we don't have as a concept, is hacer el puente, or in French, faire le pont. So that's the Spanish, that's the French. So that's when you have a bank holiday and it's on a Thursday or it's on a Tuesday, and there's obviously a weekend either after, if it's on a Thursday, or before, if it's on a Tuesday, and you take that extra day, so that Friday or that Monday, off work, and you make it a really long weekend. And it's very common in Spain, and it's getting more common in France to do that. So they have a word for it, hacer el puente. In German, this is a great word, you have the idea of Treppenwitz. So that's the idea of thinking about something really witty to reply to somebody, but 5 minutes later when they've gone. That happens to me a lot, Treppenwitz. We don't have a word for that in English. In French, they have the idea, but they don't have a word for it. They call it l'esprit de l'escalier. But Germans have got just one word that sums that up, Treppenwitz. You might have heard of this next one because it was all the rage a couple of years ago. So the concept of hygge in Danish. So it's the idea that you're cosy and content and well and enjoying life, enjoying the simple things in life, giving you a good sense of well-being. Again, that's a lot of words in English to describe one concept in Danish. And finally, and this one I'm glad I learnt because I think this describes me to a T as well, is sundoku. So it's the idea of just getting books to read and then never getting around to reading them. So having piles and piles of them at home without ever finding the time to read them. That's the Japanese word sundoku, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. So sometimes actually the language that we speak doesn't have the word that we need to describe a concept. We have to resort to another language. So just to summarise then, why don't we all speak English? Well, first of all, sometimes English doesn't have the words that we need to talk about the things that we want to talk about or express the concepts we want to talk about. We don't even speak the same English as each other. We call things different names. We don't even speak the same English as we did 700-800 years ago, because languages evolved to such an extent that it's almost unrecognisable to us. And when we're speaking English, or when we think we're speaking English, about 30%, so nearly a third of the things that the words that we use, and half of the most common words that we use, aren't English at all. I hope that's given you something to think about. If you've enjoyed this lecture, there are a couple of things you could do to take the learning and the discussion further on. So there is a really interesting dialect quiz on the New York Times website. You do have to create an account to be able to do the quiz, but it is free, I believe, and it will ask you what you call all of those things, your daps and your jitties and your couch and your lunch and your dinner, and then it will decide whereabouts in the UK you come from. So that's quite interesting to see, especially if your parents aren't from Nottingham, whether you've picked up any non-Nottingham words. If you're interested in where language came from and when words started to appear in the English language, there is an online etymological dictionary, which I will link both of these on the Show My Homework task, and so you can look up any word and it will tell you what language we've borrowed it from, if we've borrowed it from another language, when it was first used to mean certain things. So that's really interesting. And finally, Duolingo. So if you've been inspired actually to think, well, I do want to learn another language, then Duolingo is a great way of doing that. And on Thursdays after school for Year 7s, there is a Duolingo club run by the MFL department, which if you join, you can participate in our league, and Duolingo points mean prizes.